You're moving fast through the underbrush, 40,000 years ago, chasing something or being chased by it. It hardly matters which. Your foot catches a root. There's a sound like a branch snapping, except the branch is your femur. You go down hard, alone. 3 days walk from the nearest fire that isn't your own, in a landscape with hyenas in it. Right now, breaking a bone means an ambulance, a hospital bed, a cast within the hour, and a follow-up X-ray 6 weeks later to confirm it's set straight. You barely have to think about any of it. For most of the roughly 300,000 years Homo sapiens has existed, and for the older cousins who came before, none of that infrastructure existed. No antibiotics, no anesthesia, no scans. Just a body, badly damaged, and whoever happened to be standing nearby. So how did people survive injuries that should have been immediate death sentences? Shattered limbs, deep wounds, holes torn into the skull, tens of thousands of years before medicine, in any form we'd recognize, existed at all. Start with a skeleton pulled out of the ground in 1957, when archaeologist Ralph Selecki was excavating Shanidar Cave in the mountains of northern Iraq. He found the remains of a Neanderthal man, now catalogued as Shanidar 1, and the injuries were brutal. A crushing blow to the left side of his face had likely blinded that eye. His right arm was amputated at or below the elbow, leaving nothing but a withered stump. His right leg had healed badly enough to leave him with a permanent limp. Then, in 2017, researchers Eric Trinkos and Sebastian Viot re-examined his skull and found something worse. Dense, bony growths choking both ear canals, thick enough to have caused serious hearing loss on top of everything else. One eye gone. One arm gone. A limp. Now half deaf, in a world with cave lions in it. None of it killed him. The bone around every single injury had fully remodeled, proof that healing happened over years, not days. Best estimates put his age at death somewhere in his 40s. Genuinely old for a Neanderthal. Everyone assumes a group under constant survival pressure would abandon someone that disabled the moment he stopped pulling his weight. Actually, the opposite is written directly into his bones. Someone fed a blind, one-armed, partly deaf man for years. Someone protected him from the exact predators his missing senses should have made him prey to. So, injury clearly wasn't an automatic death sentence. But sympathy alone doesn't set a broken leg. What did ancient people actually know how to do about the injury itself? The clearest answer isn't prehistoric. It's ancient Egypt, and it's written down. In 1862, an American antiquities dealer named Edwin Smith purchased a badly damaged papyrus scroll in Luxor. It sat almost entirely untranslated for nearly 70 years, until 1930, when Egyptologist James Henry Breasted, working at the University of Chicago, finally published a complete translation. What Breasted found wasn't a book of spells. It read closer to a trauma manual. The papyrus, likely copied from a source over 1,000 years older, works through 48 separate case studies, stab wounds, skull fractures, dislocated jaws, crushed vertebrae, and handles every one of them in the same rigid sequence. Examine, diagnose, treat, then state a prognosis. Wounds were stitched closed. Fractures were splinted and immobilized. Fresh meat was pressed against bleeding wounds on the first day. Honey and grease came after, both of which happened to have real antibacterial properties, whether or not the physician writing this understood why. Everyone pictures ancient wound care as superstition, chanting over a cut and hoping for the best. Actually, several of those 48 cases end with the physician recommending against any treatment at all, because the injury was judged unsurvivable. That's not magical thinking. That's triage, 35 centuries before the word existed. Splints and stitches handle a broken arm. But what happened when the damage was inside the skull itself? That question has an unnervingly good answer in Peru. Bioarchaeologist John Verano at Tulane University spent decades studying trepanation, deliberately cutting or scraping a hole into a living person's skull, usually to relieve pressure from a head injury. In a 2018 study with colleagues David Kushner and Ann Teitelbaum, the team examined more than 800 trepanned skulls from sites across Peru, spanning nearly 2,000 years, tracking one specific marker, whether the bone around the hole showed new growth, which only happens if the patient lived long enough to heal. In the earliest period they studied, around 400 BC, survival sat close to 40%. By the height of the Inca Empire, in the 1400s and 1500s, survival on that same procedure averaged between 75 and 83%, done with obsidian and stone tools, and probably nothing stronger than coca leaf for pain. Everyone assumes cutting a hole in someone's skull with a rock, in the Stone Age, is close to a death sentence. Actually, by the numbers, an Inca patient having that exact surgery had better odds of walking away than a soldier having the same operation on a Civil War table 500 years later, where mortality still ran between 46 and 56%, with metal instruments and none of the sterilization. So it wasn't only the tools getting sharper. Something else was improving in parallel, and it shows up furthest back of all. In 1987, paleoanthropologist David Freyer and his colleagues published a study in the journal Nature on a skeleton excavated at Rometo Cave in Calabria in southern Italy. The remains belong to a young man who lived roughly 10 to 11,000 years ago with a severe genetic form of dwarfism. Adult height for his condition typically runs between 110 and 120 centimeters, well under 4 feet, with limbs too short and joints too restricted for running, throwing a spear with force, or keeping pace on a long hunt. By any purely physical measure, he should have struggled to survive inside a hunter-gatherer economy built entirely around mobility. Instead, he lived into his late teens, buried in the same cave, in the same manner as everyone else in his group. Freyer's original interpretation argued this proved deliberate, active care. Later researchers pushed back on exactly how much extra accommodation that required. That debate is still open. But even the more cautious reading agrees on the one fact that actually matters here: nobody left him behind. 4 different injuries, 4 continents, 4 different centuries. A crushed eye and an amputated arm in Iraq. A stab wound catalogued on a papyrus in Egypt. A hole drilled into a living skull in Peru. A body too small to hunt, kept alive in Italy. Strip away the specific technique in each case, the splint, the honey, the obsidian blade, and what's left every single time is the same underlying mechanism, not a tool. People choosing repeatedly over years to carry someone who could no longer carry themselves. Go back to that moment in the underbrush. 40,000 years ago, femur broken, 3 days from anywhere. You're not actually as alone out there as it feels. Not if your group behaves the way Shanadar's did, the way that Egyptian physician did, the way an Inca surgeon or a family in Calabria did. Today, you have hospitals, ambulances, and insurance paperwork standing between you and death by injury. Back then, all people had was each other, and it turned out to be enough. Far more often than it had any right to be. Medicine didn't start with a drug, or a tool, or a technique. It started the first time someone refused to leave.